make
Sure.
sure that we are in fact recording. Okay, cool. I think we're good. So, Dark Bleatings, everybody. You'll all know I've been teasing this interview all week. We have the award-winning Paul Tremblay with us today, and I'm really excited if you can't tell. Hello.
Hey. Thank you, Kaylee. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, you were also a much requested author. When I've asked people who they would like me to speak with, your name has come up over and over
Oh,
again. So I'm sure everyone else is going to be really excited to see you here as well. Um, Needless to say, I am a huge fan of your books, and I
thank you.
appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and grill you a little. Well, not grill you, but ask you some possibly odd questions. um, I wanted to start with your endings, and I don't want to spoil anything for
Sure.
anybody, but it's one of my favorite things about your work is your endings because they're always really well set up, but also a complete shock at the same time somehow. Do you know where you're going when you start a book?
Well, first, thank you. That's very kind. I know a lot of people don't like my endings, so I'll take the people that do. um, Most of the time, actually, I should say, just about every. I'm trying to think of a novel where I didn't know the ending. Most of the time, I have a general sense of what the end is going to be.
Hmm.
And in some, sometimes it can be more concrete than others, and it might just sometimes it's a vague notion, but I kind of feel like I need that. Like, it'd be really intimidating for me to try to write a book where I have no idea what the ending is. And actually, I think Disappearance at Devil's Rock is probably the closest to a novel that I wrote without knowing the ending.
Hmm.
And in fact, the ending changed after I turned into a draft to my editor. So yeah, that book was like the hardest one, writing wise for me. Um, but I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't know, my endings. I guess the only other thing I would say is I've never really like second guessed an ending. That doesn't mean that they're great
Hmm.
endings. It's just for whatever reason, those are the things that feel right to me. And so much of writing is just going by feel. And also, I'm
Yeah.
just drinking my first cup of caffeine this morning. So if I
Oh
sound
yeah,
stupid, that's my excuse.
it's a necessity.
With actually, I'm noticing for the people watching profanity on the cup, which I did not notice.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, the first book I read of yours was A Head Full of Ghosts, and I actually saw you when you were in the UK, and you were doing a little tour with Adam
Oh
Neville.
yeah.
Um, but I was too shy to talk to anyone at that point, so I did have questions at the time, but I was
Oh no.
just standing at the back, like, no, I
Yeah.
won't say anything. Um, and that the ending of A Head Full of Ghosts, again, which I will not spoil, but I loved that book because it's in one of my favorite subgenres of horror, and I loved the reality TV aspect of it. It was so interesting, and I was getting to the end and I was thinking, what a great book. I've really enjoyed this. And then that last paragraph, I was like, oh no, this is an excellent book. Like it
Oh well,
really
thank
like
you.
I felt like it really like sealed what I was hoping was happening for the whole time.
Mhm.
And then um, you played with your format quite a bit in your latest horror movie,
Yeah.
which is really creepy, by the way. I got this edition with the scaly feeling
Yeah, they did a
uh,
really nice job.
cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what drew you to writing, like working with like the script format as well as with the prose?
Sure. Can I tell you a quick story about Bristol though? Because it's kind of fun.
Oh, please do.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So then I was wonderful. Actually, that day was the first time I got to meet Adam in person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that event was sort of late. Uh, no, no. So it was like a weekday. I think we didn't get out of there until like a little bit after 10.
Mm-hmm.
When I say there, like the event and signing books. And we went to look for dinner, and my publicist and friend Lydia helped sort of shepherd us toward a restaurant because she said, "Oh, it's open until it's serving food until 10:30 or something." But we got there, like no one was here, so the chef left, and we're like, "What?" So, just something that would never happen in a big city over here, for good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So then they it was like Adam and actually Tim Levin was there, my friend Damien Sayel of the band's St. Pierre Snake Invasion, and now he's in McCluskey too, and Lydia and myself. Anyway, so they said, "Oh, we're going to treat you to a traditional British dinner of ale and crisps." So yeah, it was a lot of fun, but I was really hungry, and I had to resort to like a midnight talk the hotel into giving me like a ham and cheese sandwich. But anyway,
Yeah.
that Bristol was a very fun night. I look fondly upon that. Sorry we didn't get a chance to talk.
Oh no, well that was my fault because I mean I could have the opportunity was there, but I was just I had met Adam before that event at must have been another convention, and I just read my first book of his as well. Funnily, I'm friends with Tim, and he has known every single author that I've interviewed so far. I always message like I was like, do you know Paul? He's like, yeah, what a lovely guy. So,
Tim is a lovely guy. Yeah, Tim knows everybody.
He knows everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which continent you live on. He's
right.
Sorry.
And I just realized I butchered. It wasn't ale and chips. It was my chips. It was ale and crisps.
Crisps, yeah. We know.
So even less sustaining. Anyway,
British culture that.
Right. Yeah. So the screenplay stuff that went into horror movie, you know, I as you can tell, maybe I'm drawn to sort of like doing some sort of, I think they're fun typographical and narrative sort of techniques that are sort of different. But for me, they have to make sure they're there for a reason and not just hopefully like just some sort of gimmick. But the fun thing for me in horror movie was a little bit of just like thinking about the story in a logical way. I was like, okay, I have this film in 1993 that was mostly filmed, but never made it to screen. And I'm going to bounce, actually through 3 timelines, 93, 2008, and now. And I knew I needed the reader to know the whole movie of the original movie. And I just thought it would be really boring to have like characters sitting around talking about, oh, this is what happened in the movie. So I was like, oh, I'll include the screenplay of the original, and hopefully do it in like I gave myself permission to write a screenplay in a way that no one would want you to write a screenplay. It's not a spoiler for anyone, hasn't read it. Like Cleo, the screenwriter, says, oh, I wrote this, I'm purposely breaking the rules, of writing a screenplay.
Yeah.
And I needed that for a novel.
Yeah. I loved that because I studied script writing, and they vary about the rules if you study it. Like if you're putting directions in and you don't infer tone, that's up to the director to do, and blah 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 blah. So I really enjoyed, like, as soon as Cleo was like, well, I did it the way I wanted to write it, and there's reasons why I was like, oh cool, this is going to be, because I'm a bit of a script nerd. I collect them. I've got books of screenplays, and I try and track down, in scripts that were written as they were before they filmed the thing, because sometimes the script changes as they go.
Right. A shooting script compared to
they publish like the final version, and I'm like, oh, I wanted the one that was before they changed stuff and whatever. It was. I was going to ask you this later, but because we just talked about format and doing something a bit different with the style, your short story, It's Against the Law to Feed Ducks from Growing Things. That's my favorite story in that collection. And I think it's because that's about from a child's perspective, and he thinks that they're going on a little trip, but actually there's clearly something else going on. And that kind of story of for anyone who hasn't read it, it's you quickly gather that actually there is something quite big going on, and they're not so much on a trip as running from something possibly, and there's an absence of people in traffic, and things closed and everything. And that kind of story, again, I love anything that hints at the apocalypse or like cataclysmic events. I've never read it through the perspective of a child before, though, and I thought that was so interesting, the way that you fed us the information like through his perspective, so we knew we caught on more than he did. But what interests you about writing from that sort of narrative?
Thank you. Excuse me, sorry. Hold on, let me mute and cough really quickly.
That's right, I'm gonna have a sip while we do
I mean, again, I think some of it started off with like the logic part of it, like, oh, like if I told it from the parents' point of view, they would know what was going on. And I kind of really wanted to keep what was this apocalyptic or disastrous event that was happening. Because the idea of like at the time, my kids were pretty much the same age as the two as described in the story. And it's like, so you try to protect your kids from from the awful stuff that's happening in the world. At least when they're that young. Because Jesus, I don't even remember the protagonist's name. That's terrible. The little boy, he was like 5 years old, I
Is it
think.
Billy? I thought I wrote it down, but
Maybe.
it's possibly Billy.
Yeah, possibly Billy. Yeah, I think you're right. I also knew I couldn't do first person because that would be too twee. Like it couldn't be in his language. Um, so yeah, like it's fine. Like the broad decisions you make in a story, something like that, or like the screenplay, and then it has like all these ripple effects in the story, and actually helps lead the story in a lot of ways. Which is, if there are any fun parts of writing, that's one of them. uh,
Yeah.
yeah, but thank you. I mean, in a lot of ways, I felt like that story was like one of the first, because I think I wrote that in 2005, was something I was like, oh, I felt like that story like hit like an inner chord closer than any other stories that I'd written. And really, it almost not a template, but like you can see like a lot of stories and even novels sort of go back to that family ideal, and and some ambiguity too. That might have been like the first story with ambiguity that I really got serious with.
Yeah. I've actually made a note that I wanted to talk to you about the way you use ambiguity, because um usually, if especially with a novel, if there's an ambiguous ending, that kind of irritates me normally, because I'm like, but oh
Yeah,
but my I I didn't think this was going to be my favorite novel of yours, but it's the one that I have thought about just consistently for years since I read it, is The Cabin at the End of the World.
yeah,
And the to me, I don't know, obviously this is my perception of it and
sure,
how I interpreted it, but I felt like a lot of people, because there's a lot of discourse about the ending on that one. I've seen a lot of people like,
yeah,
I think it was this, I think it was this. And I feel like a lot of people missed the point of it, because the point for me was that this was the end of the world as these parents knew it.
yes,
And so I was like, in a bigger worldwide sense, it doesn't actually even matter what's going on ultimately, because for these people. And I just, yeah, I read it, and I just, yeah, have not stopped thinking about it for years. I did go to see the adaptation, which I
yeah,
liked, but I've been telling everyone, like, if you liked the film, read the book, because
yeah.
I did think, yeah, I preferred your book ending
Well, thank
to
you.
the film one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, see, Kaylee gets it. I know, I appreciate it. I mean, that's sort of, pretty much exactly what I was going for. I mean, I think I've said some of those exact words to some people sometimes. So, yeah, I mean, for Andrew and Eric, whether or not that whole world is ending, they've experienced an apocalypse.
Yeah,
Um, and to,
yeah,
to go back to like, ambiguity, I just don't, I understand that a lot of readers have a hard time with ambiguity. Um, and I think all readers should have a hard time with it if it's not used correctly.
hmm,
Um, it's not, whether or not I've used it correctly or not, but in my mind, like if you're going to use ambiguity, it has to be part and parcel of the theme of the story. Like there can't be, in my head, there's no better way to tell the story without this. So in the case of The Cabin at the End of the World, I really wanted that book to feel like 2016.
yeah,
Or just the idea that every time you look at your phone or a screen, it feels like the world is ending.
hmm,
But like, is this the first domino? Is it not the first domino? Is it, as some sort of slow concatenation of events already
hmm,
started? So yeah, I was not going to give a definitive answer because it was supposed to feel like, hey, like we just don't know. It always feels this way.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So like you, I like the movie, but hate the ending, and I can't help but be be a little bit of a brat. Not brat, summer brat. I don't know. Is that a term over there in the UK now? Like that's been,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Um, I can't help but feel like a brat sometimes, thinking, okay, for all those people like who wanted a more definitive ending for Cabin, like, what do you
mm,
think now? Like, do you like that better? Do you like Knight's ending better?
yeah.
That like sort of
I,
like Christian parable ending? Oh, it's awful.
I
Anyway,
had a feeling he was going to lean into one way or the other, but I was watching it with my husband, and he was like, the ending. And I was like, trust me, the book is totally different.
yeah,
um, yeah, because I just thought for the protagonist of the book, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what happens after what they've experienced. So
right.
yeah, I don't even have children, but I have a younger brother, which in my mind, he's 30 now, but he's still
Yeah.
6 to me. And I used to work in children's entertainment, so I don't know, I love children. I've spent a lot of time
Yeah. Yeah.
around them, so that it really it got me. So I can't imagine reading it as a parent, and it's just the opening for that had me so tense as well, and that's another thing as well as your endings. I really love how you open. I think Survivor Song
Mm.
probably my favorite opening,
Oh,
because
thank you.
I like the general rage zombie genre is also right up my street, and that opening was so scary to me.
Well, thank you. Yeah. No, I set that at the house I used to live in. And
Oh
of
wow.
course, the husband's name was Paul, but he was like 5'8", and I am not 5'8", so not quite the same character.
There's you have a short story. Hold on, I have to check my note because I
Sure.
can never remember titles when I read a short story. Sorry, Paul. Oh, there it is.
Oh, no problem.
The blog at the end of the world. I can't believe I
Yeah.
forgot the title of that. So I felt, I like to think that that's in universe for the cabin at the end of the world. But that had that one's in The Beast You Are, for anyone who hasn't
Yeah.
read it. And that's Becca writes a blog, and it's in reverse order. So we're reading
Right.
the last post first, isn't it? Yes, and then we trail
Yes.
back, and that's dealing with that really hit home for me for the medical paranoia. Well, medical paranoia, is that right? Yeah,
Yeah.
the mistrust that the public seem to have now when people, like, from medical professionals, or especially if the government's telling
Hmm.
you to take a medication or something.
Right.
And that felt the same to me, as like, regardless of how you take that, if it's actually a conspiracy, if there's something going on, or if she is really paranoid, that felt the same as your novel to me, in
Yeah.
that the world for her was very much imploding. And yeah, I've noticed you do use, like, real world anxieties quite a bit, like the global stuff.
Mm.
um what draws you to that? Because you have to live in it in real life.
Right.
It's interesting that you use it in your fiction as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I mean, like, I think my superpower is I'm afraid of everything and afraid all the time. Sort of like the Hulk says, I'm always angry. Uh, yeah. So I mean, it's going to like seep in. As sometimes, as often as I try to think about horror tropes and how I might sort of refract them, it's impossible to not have those fears and, frankly, obsessions seep in. And, like, one of my obsessions, which I didn't know, and at the time of writing the blog at the end of the world, because I wrote that in 2008.
Mm.
I felt like that was the first time I was really aware of the potential problem of misinformation on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And how that plays through that story. Um, and that's something really I think I spent, well, the sort of like 3 novel cycle of A Head Full of Ghosts, Disappearance of Devil's Rock, and The Cabin at the End of the World, all have ambiguity. There's different varying levels of media involved in each book.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, just to sort of, represent, or just me being obsessed with the idea of like how our minds are being shaped or misshaped by the
Mm-hmm.
internet, by what by what information we're bombarded with. So similarly with those 3 books, the ambiguity they employ, uh, I wanted it to be not like that I was withholding information necessarily. I guess in Cabin, I'm ultimately withholding one piece of information, but at the same time, I don't think I am, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the ambiguity is there because I've given you a data glut. I've given you everything too
Yeah.
much. So that's what makes it harder to figure out if something's supernatural is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me feels like living in the now. Um, did I answer the question? I think I did. Did I?
I
I don't know.
remember what I asked you now, Paul, because
Yeah.
my mind
Yeah.
is a million miles a second. I've actually had to make notes for this one, because
Yeah.
I started free forming quite a bit, because everyone I interview, I've read quite a bit, so I don't worry that I'm gonna suddenly run out of questions. But
Yeah.
that backfired on me when I talked to Rachel Harrison, because I got nervous midway through, and my mind blanked, and I
Yeah.
looked like an idiot.
No,
Um,
I'm sure it was fine.
yes.
The last thing I would say about the blog story, I won like an online contest in
Mm.
2008. I wish it was still there, but it's not. But when they first publish it online, so they publish it like a fake blog.
Mhm.
So like the posts were there in the order, so like you could click on the links, you could the comments were posted as comments with little avatars and stuff. It was a lot of fun to have it that way. But anyway,
It's cool. It feels like that story, the fact that you wrote that so far before 2020 is so funny. It's like the Simpsons predicting like the future, because that
yeah,
really, it feels like a 2020 story because of the amount of panic and paranoia and everything, and then it shifted what people were focused on afterwards, because then all of a
right,
sudden no one trusted vaccines, all vaccines, not just the COVID one. And I have to. It's a little side tangent anecdote.
yeah,
When I first started seeing my now husband, every time I like told him something that wasn't to do directly with us, he'd be like, "Is that true?" And he'd like Google it, and it used to
yeah,
really annoy me, because I'd be like, "Why don't you just take my word for a thing?" But it did turn out
yeah,
that half the time I was wrong about, because I'd read it somewhere online. So he's made me less gullible over time, because there's so much that's just absolute nonsense
yeah,
that we
yeah,
just
yeah.
take as, whenever I see anything now, I'm like, wait, what's the source? Who
Yeah,
said it?
right.
Just double check. um, the so I haven't read your books in publication order. So I'd read A Head
That's
Full
fine.
of Ghosts a few years ago when you were in Bristol, and then because I was so obsessed with that, then I went on I like to call it my Paul Tremblay binge, where I ordered and read everything that you had published
Thank
up
you.
to that date, which is why I only have a few things displayed here. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on Between the Little Sleep
Hmm.
and horror movie. So like we're going back a bit
Yeah.
with this one, and different genre to this. Is there anything about your storytelling that you think has changed? And is there anything that has remained consistent that you really enjoy to do?
Oh, that's a great question. Hard too. I mean, I would hope that I'm getting better. Like I would hate to think that I would read something that I wrote like The Little Sleep in 2007 and published in 2009 originally. If I went back and said, "Oh my God, this is genius." So, it's been a long time since I've read either of those sleep books. I'm very proud of them. So I'm sure just like on a sentence level, I could point out, I was like, why was I doing that? Um, and honestly, I try not to think too much about like the changing. So
Mhm.
that's something like I feel like if I worried about that, it would sort of like slow me down or make me
Mhm.
too self-conscious about what I was doing. But in terms of like story wise, I think even with the Little Sleep, so I just happened to have this random idea about a narcoleptic private detective in South Boston who
So
had,
funny.
who had incredibly vivid dreams. So even though the affect of that is
Mhm.
not horror, it's still like a fairly dark story and there's humor.
Mhm.
Um, but even within that story, like I'm writing about sort of the ambiguity and mystery of identity and memory in reality and how malleable all that stuff is. So,
Mhm.
you know, a lot of the stuff that I was writing about in, sort of the horror books is there
Mhm.
just in a different, more focused on the characters' sort of ambiguities with Mark Genovich than sort of like the wider world with like A Head Full of Ghosts or Cabin at the End of the World.
Yeah, first of all, I just have to say the mystery that's posed in the beginning for the case he's trying to solve like really made me laugh, because it's so weird,
Yeah,
but in like a really good way. And I don't normally read. I usually only exclusively read horror, and that's it. But
yeah,
if it's an author like yourself, or like Tim Levin, or someone
yeah.
that has dabbled in another genre, I'll still read it anyway because it was by you. And
Thank you.
I have a friend who's narcoleptic, and so
Oh,
that's what I was picturing every time, because it's such a strange condition.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah,
I turned around,
uh,
did he just be gone sometime? Like, oh, he was
yeah.
so comfortable.
And when I was writing the book, well, it's funny. So you mentioned the first chapter, which I'll mention. Like it
Mm,
starts with a stereotype of a noir, well, an American noir film where like a
mhm,
big city detective, beautiful woman walks into his office and he asks her what the case is, and she holds up her hand, and there are bandages wrapped around her bases of her fingers, and she says, "Someone stole my fingers and replaced them with someone else's fingers." Uh, so in The Little Sleep, it's like Mark had fallen asleep and had a hallucination. But
yeah.
when I first had the idea for that, that was my first image. And I initially tried to like, oh, I'm going to write like a horror slash Philip K. Dick kind of detective
Mhm,
story. and no ideas formed. So actually, I put like that first chapter away for almost a year until I stumbled upon reading about the symptoms of narcolepsy. Um, yeah, which even then in 2007, there really hadn't been a ton of research. I'm sure there's a lot more known now, which is great for me because I hate research. Really, one of my main texts, my biggest research was actually having to read a lot of crime fiction because I, at the time, like I wasn't setting out to write a crime story. I just happened to have this idea, so I'd read some Raymond Chandler, but I'd read like his letters and all sorts of stuff just to sort of help with the voice. But the only thing on narcolepsy, honestly, that I could find at the time was like a self-published memoir from a woman who suffered from narcolepsy. So I gave my character a lot of the symptoms that she had.
Yeah, it felt very true to me because this friend I had he worked nights
Yeah.
in a elderly care
Yeah.
home. And he said that it was a running joke with the residents because he was working at night and it was dark. If he sat down, he'd just go. And it wasn't because he was tired. It was like it was because he was relaxed. So they'd be like, "Oh, we'll let you know if there's an emergency." He said that they were great. Never,
nice.
never told on him to his boss or anything. But what can you do? It's out of your control. Yeah. That detective, I loved that character, and that's something I'm very character focused when I read. So if I don't care about the characters, then I don't care about the plot, no matter how good it is. And I find your characters feel so true to life and authentic, and you don't have any like one note kind of characters, whether they're like good or bad or whatever. They always seem like I go back to The Cabin at the End of the World because I can't help it because I really love it.
Thank you.
I love it's Eric and
Andrew.
Andrew, yeah. I loved them. They and I loved that one of them was bit skeptical, quite skeptical, and then the other one was way more open to like religious and supernatural kind of things. And I loved the family setup because I think it's sad to be, sorry, this is a slight tangent, but it's sad to be that children who are adopted typically tend to have like abandonment issues, but the couple that have chosen them, like they've gone out of their way to like choose the child. So I always think that like those kinds of family setups are like a little bit extra special to me because of like the amount of love that comes from them before they've even met her or seen her or anything. And she's so cute. When you were constructing your group to appear at this cabin, did you know how many? Oh, I assume you knew how many characters you wanted actually, because that's symbolically significant, isn't it?
Yeah.
For but did you have any ideas in mind for like who you personally would have cast if it was going to be made into a film? Because I'm surprised by the casting of the movie.
Oh no, I was definitely surprised by Batista, but actually, my favorite part of the movie are the actors. I think they nailed sort of the emotional sort of arcs of those characters. But I typically don't. Or I shouldn't even say typically. I don't think of actors when I imagine characters. Honestly, I'm usually stealing friends and family, at least their physicalness.
Yeah.
Like Eric, for example, is a friend, Chris Irvin, writer as well. He had a book with Titan called Ragged, which I highly recommend. Just physically, bald, Midwesterner, played soccer in high school. I like having sort of like the broad strokes, and then it's funny how instantly they become different characters to me once they say or do something. But I know it's weird for friends and family when they read themselves, like even with horror movie, Valentina and Cleo, and I have to like slow myself down sometimes and not say their real names.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a big deal if I say, because the real names are Victoria and Chloe. And I initially had it that way. It's like, you know what, I'm going to change it just in case, because awful things happen. But yeah, so two of my daughter's friends, I just took their physicalness, but character-wise, they're so different. So, but I know, like just talking to them recently, it's strange to read sort of their avatar in a book.
I'd be
Uh,
careful with that. I wrote a
yeah.
play once. It was like a comedy, and I just named the characters after people in my real life that are really close to me. And originally they were like those people, but then it morphed over time through drafts. And then I just kind of forgot that. And then when they all came to see the play, they were all offended, so offended, because all of the characters became ridiculous through
Oh yeah.
drafts. And I was like, oh yeah, lesson learned. Um, yeah.
But
Can
oh
I
yes,
ask?
so the
Sorry,
last
Tom.
thing I would say, you asked about the number of characters too. But the when I was writing the Cabin at the End of the World, I actually wrote it under the title The Four. Like that was
Mhm,
how I submitted it. Um, and I'm glad. The only time I've been glad that my publisher has asked for a title change.
mhm.
Uh, and it is the only time I changed the title from handing in the draft and afterwards. So I mean, I had the Cabin at the End of the World quickly, partly because of the blog at the end of the world, and if I were ever to I was thinking if I was going to write a third Genovich novel years ago, I was going to call it Sleep at the End of the World.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah. But I don't know if that book's ever going to happen. Yeah, but anyway, so yeah. No, there were definitely, I went into that book. I took a lot of notes first, and I wish I had that notebook around. I could show you, but I don't. Little character sketches and things like that.
Well, that's cool. I love seeing authors' notebooks if people keep them with just like, oh, I did have this
Oh,
is the
yeah,
edition
yeah.
with the extra stuff
Right.
in the back, and that I was yeah, I love extra details like that. It's so funny to me because my notes when I'm writing are incoherent even to me
Yeah.
if I haven't looked at them for a while. I'm like, I have got no idea what I was. I'm like,
Same.
remember the thing, and I'm like, what did he mean?
Yeah.
um, the there is a short story in The Beast You Are. I have to ask you because since I've read it, I've been going, what does it mean? And it's mostly size. Really, really short story.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's said as a monster crumbles a house. There's a little boy in it, and he writes a poem in his mind.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that there is a meaning to it, but I've been going back and forth for ages on is this just a monster story about a monster that actually crushes a house and it kills
Yeah.
good, or is it like a comment on I don't know, I sound pretentious now. Is it a comment on sort of like the lasting impact of art and creation? Like,
Hmm.
what is it? I have
Yeah,
to
I mean,
ask.
sure. So I mean, I have to like freely admit, like sort of in the moment of writing a story, I just sort of go with it and it feels if it feels right. Because I really, I'm not someone who studied literature or English in college. I was a mathematics major and and even got a master's degree in it.
Mhm,
Um, so in some ways, I mean, there's good and bad to that. Like, I have friends who've read, it feels like they've read everything and quote everything that they've read, and I'm like, yeah, I forget the title of the thing that I read like 4 weeks ago.
mhm,
But at the same time, I feel like I'm not necessarily super burdened with like, oh, what does this mean? I mean, I do think about it usually in the aftermath.
mhm,
But honestly, my favorite stories are the ones that sort of like communicate at an emotional level
mhm,
and sort of describe feelings that there's no other way to describe them without story or without music or without like a painting, without art.
mhm.
So all that said, so like, looking at that story, it sort of started with just like the silly joke of like, oh, a monster, like how would a monster, uh, sharpen a pencil or something stupid like that. But
Yeah.
I think looking back at it, it's just sort of like represents sort of like, you know, this child's sort of experience of the world and like how big and scary it is kind of thing. But, he
Mhm.
still approaches it with sort of like open eyes and open heart, even if,
Yeah.
the world is going to get him eventually. Maybe not necessarily at that age, but at a
Well,
at
I
an age.
liked his ruminations on the pencil sharpener because my friend has a 4-year-old and the stuff he comes out with it's
Yeah,
you realize how different your world is to theirs, and because you forget as you
yeah.
age like what things were important to you when you were 5.
Mhm.
And yeah, him just thinking so much about this pencil sharpener. I just yeah, the kid I know thinks a lot about dinosaurs,
Yeah,
but in like he's upset about things like why isn't the brontosaurus the king of the dinosaurs? It should be the brontosaurus. Like that's
yeah,
kind of his concern. And I think yeah, you do capture childhood very well when you're using young characters, because I think that's hard to do when you're an
Thank you.
adult, because you
Yeah.
just don't remember. So I suppose it helps that you had children though, so
Yeah.
see
No,
how
and
they
like
act.
had children, been a high school math teacher too, so like I've never left the school schedule. So I don't know, I just am in that sort of constant rhythm of being really excited in June when our school lets out,
Yeah.
and then like now, like a week and a half away from school starting, being really depressed. So I think that helps me stay in connection with maybe the emotional life of being a kid.
Do you not find teenagers frightening, Paul? Because I'm really scared of them these days, and always have been actually.
Uh, I don't know. I guess the short answer would be no. I mean, not any more than the other sort of like age group. And again, I think that's a reflection. I'm just like around them frequently.
Mhm,
Uh, I will say it is sort of changing. I don't feel as much a connection now that my children are a little bit older,
mhm.
approaching their early 20s. So I do notice like, oh, I guess I'm not as much of, like so a freshman in the US is what, like 14 or 15, uh,
Mhm.
you know. But as a writer, I love it, like just hearing them talk because how their slang changes and they'll use even like school specific words and, just
Yeah.
paying attention that way is just like a lot of fun.
Do you think that they're older than we were at their age? Does
Say
that
that one
make
more time.
sense?
Yeah.
Do you feel
Oh,
like they're older than we were when we like? I feel like the 15-year-old now is way older than I was at 15, if that makes any
oh
sense.
yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I would say I go back and forth. Sometimes I might think that way, but then when I see some of these people, like, man, like they look so young, younger
Yeah,
than 15. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, if I think back to when I was that age, there were some kids that looked like adults with full beards, and I'm sure that's, a part
Mhm.
of just the weird lens of memory. Whereas I'm sure if I actually saw them now or saw pictures, like, oh yeah, they look 15 or something. But like back then as a kid, you're like, oh my God, this person looks so much older, or, so much more mature, or they're doing, so much other stuff. And I can't imagine having that all refracted through being online as a teenager,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
horror. Yeah.
I think I was in the last age group that didn't have like the internet.
Hmm.
So that came in like I think when I was about 18 or something. And I'm glad that my every move hasn't been I haven't just typed
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
Um, yeah, they sound old to me. My I have a niece, and when she was 8, she told me to chillax. And I was like, what do you
Yeah.
mean? So
That's
yeah.
funny. Like someone told me, like, well, I need your husband to look this up to see if it's true. But someone's saying, oh yeah, the Gen Alpha, that's starting to be referred to over here anyway. They're rejecting screen time, rejecting the phones. I'm like, is that true? I hope it is.
Oh,
Uh,
that would be nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a bit
Yeah,
yeah. So social media isn't the best for people's self-esteem when they're
no.
growing up, I don't think. I've
Or
seen
a
apparently there's a
middle-aged author either.
oh
That's not good.
yeah, I
Yeah,
never everyone's always asking me if I've got a happy goat TikTok, and I technically do, but I went on there and I it was a wall of sound and color, and I was like, I don't know what to do with
yeah,
this. It's just sitting there unused at the moment. But
yeah,
Instagram I can just about get to grips with.
yeah,
But yeah, the short form video I don't know what to I don't know what to
yeah.
do. Makeup tutorials, apparently that's the thing. That's what you got to get on that, Paul. So
Okay.
apparently
Yeah.
that's how you do the TikTok. So do you have format wise, so obviously you've got to like use a bit of script. Sorry, that was such a tangent, Paul, but nothing
Oh,
to
that's
do.
quite all right. Yeah.
um so yeah, because you've played with format a little bit here. Are there any other styles that you think that you might want to use, like if you want to go you I've seen a little bit like poetry little bits and stuff in some of your shorts and stuff. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that you kind of want to delve into, maybe, or an
Oh,
actual script? Have you done a script?
yeah, sort of. Yeah, it hasn't gone anywhere. Although I just recently worked with, he did most of the writing of the script and I sort of rewrote it. But I mean, that was fun. The sort of the contrarian in me, like, sort of rebels against the whole idea of a three-act structure that's forced on, some of the
Mhm.
American movies and the whole thing about beats. So I won't. But part of that's just a reflection of like, I haven't really studied screenplays. Like, why can't we just write a good story? Why does it have to
Yeah.
fit? Why does it have to fit this? I mean, has has anyone seen like an Asian horror movie or like The Wailing, which has, I don't know how many acts that has, but it's definitely more than three.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I'm sure I'll always be like the novel I'm working on now is going to have some typographical stuff with, hopefully the publisher will go along with it. Parts of the book will be presented in sort of like a strange way to represent sort of what's happening mentally or inside the brain of a particular character. But again, like, I get excited by that stuff, but like I have to be able to justify like this has to be here for the story. So yeah.
Like the little details. So I'm thinking horror movie off the top of my head at the moment, because this is the one I most recently read, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And there are like little details that are fed in as you go along. And do you do that? Like some of the like I won't spoil it, but like the thing with his finger, for example, I was confused for a second. Then I was like, wait a minute. Is that stuff that how much of that is in a first draft, and how many of the typically, like, do you do it? Sorry, this is a terribly worded question.
No, I understand what you're asking. Yeah. So the way I write is by the time I have a full draft, it's pretty gone over because I do a ton of editing as I go. It's just I can't move on. I wish I could just, well, maybe I don't wish I could. I'm just not the writer who can spill it all out and then go back and rewrite it and rewrite. I have to go in very small increments and go in the order in which I think it's going to appear in the book as well. Like I don't jump around. So typically, if I get 500 words, it's a good day. And the next day I'll go back, and if it's a novel, not only those 500, but I'll probably go back to the beginning of the chapter. And so things slowly. I know a lot of writers like put everything down and they cut. I'm sort of like the opposite. Like I start small and I just sort of keep expanding before I move on to like the next chapter and the chapter after that. So by the time, it's not perfect. I still have to edit, but by the time I have a full draft, it's for the majority of my books, major changes don't really happen from there. The two books that are exceptions to that were Disappearance at Devil's Rock and The Pallbearers Club. Both books I cut like 10,000 words out and then changed things. But with horror movie, also a slightly different, like for most of my books, I write like a plot outline first, or at least some of it. But for that book, I didn't. But I sort of like plotted as I went. Like I kept bizarre notes, which are in the back of that Titan edition. Little look aheads. And so there were actually some surprises in this book that I wasn't anticipating. And some of that involves the finger stuff that you were talking about, which was fun, to have that sort of have that come up. Yeah, I'm trying not to be too spoilery.
Yeah. It's really surprising to me that because I assumed you were a plotter more than a pantser, like at least with a plot outline, because of the way your stories tend to come together. And when I finished this, when I closed it, I think I even may have said aloud to myself, "Oh, that came together so beautifully." That was like all of these little elements that you'd fed in that were like some things just seemed like little character details that came back round for the final part of it. And so it's really surprising to me that this is the one that you didn't do that with, because I thought this was so tight, like,
well, thank you,
detail wise.
So I similarly didn't, so I didn't do an outline for A Head Full of Ghosts, and I didn't do an outline for that one. And because I kind of was like, oh, this book feels like it has some things in common with A Head Full of Ghosts, so I figured I would approach the book the same way. But some of my other books I've been forced to do outlines just for the publisher to offer me a new book deal. Like, no, we want to see an outline. So something like Survivor Song, I really probably only outline like the first 100 pages or something, and I like a lot of hand waving. So I don't know. And honestly, sometimes I try to make each book feel different, like the balancing act of, I've done this before. I want that confidence, like I'll be able to do it again. But I also want it to feel different, because I worry if it felt like I was doing the same thing, I just wouldn't be as emotionally invested. And I don't want it to feel like work. I mean, it always feels like work, but I don't want it to feel like work in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like a slog. Like,
oh,
I'm gonna go back to the desk. You've ended the world, or ended the world of characters
Yeah.
several times. What is it about that what draws you to that kind of scenario?
It's just like a fear of mine, as
Yeah.
a child, teen of the 80s, when like my monster nightmares, I wouldn't say ended because I still have monster nightmares, but when the monster nightmares started also becoming like nuclear war nightmares,
Mhm.
that was sort of, the start of like the more quote unquote adult fears, I suppose. And a lot of the short stories that I was writing in the early 2000s or the first decade of the 2000s were sort of pre-apocalyptic or in the midst.
Mhm.
Wouldn't call them post-apocalyptic. I think that definitely represent. My son was born in 2000 and my daughter in 2004. So just like the new fear was not only would some sort of like awful event kill me, but I would see it kill my kids too. So not to get too dark, but certainly, I'm sure a fear that many parents share. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. The fear of killing any child that you're in charge of is very present. When I was working in kids entertainment, every time I had a group, especially if they put me in the crash, I was like, right, just for the next hour, don't kill any kids
Yeah.
accidentally. Don't.
Yeah.
And they'll get into everything, so you've got to cover all your bases.
Right. Right.
They
Right.
they create dangers that you couldn't have even foreseen. Children
Oh,
somehow,
absolutely.
it's a superpower that they have. Yeah, I'm a big fan of apocalyptic. I like post-apocalypse, but I prefer like actually seeing the world burn. I don't know why
Mhm.
I'm like that, but maybe that's because
Interesting.
I just think, well, if the world ended and I was in my house, I'd finally have time to read all my books. So never ended TPR. I
Yeah.
have I have to let you go. I am conscious of time, but I have a final question which you're
Uh-huh.
going to think is really stupid. It's been a running joke in these author interviews where typically I hold up it was this little purple character, and there was a
Uh-huh.
prize for anyone in the comments that knew what it was. And it has finally been guessed. So now we've moved on to a new thing.
Oh.
So you're the first person to see this, Paul.
Okay. I might have to
This
put
is
on my reading glasses to see it properly.
no, it's very large. It'll be fine.
Oh, okay.
So for people who are actually watching rather than just listening to this is supposed to be a character from a franchise that you definitely know, but it doesn't look anything like it. So this is the new thing is can you guess what this is supposed to be?
Am I supposed to try to guess?
Yeah, have a
Oh,
guess.
okay.
I'll send you a prize if you get it, Paul.
Is it Falcor from the Neverending Story? Like that's an
No,
old reference. No,
that's a
just the
really good. That's
just the
actually a
dog
really good
face. Yeah, yeah.
guess. It does. Do you know? It actually looks more like Falcor than the thing it's supposed to be.
It's
But
not
it's not.
from Avatar. Appa?
No,
No, no. It definitely doesn't look like it. Mothra?
no.
No. Yeah,
I
those are my
feel
three guesses.
I feel like this is going to be a longer running thing than the last thing was. I can't imagine in what universe anyone is going to guess it, but I'll have
Yeah.
to start doling out clues. But if you stay there after we've said goodbye to everyone else, Paul, I'll tell you. But
Oh,
then you're
okay, good.
sworn
I
to
I
secrecy.
will be sworn to secrecy. Sure.
um, is there anything that you would finally just like to promote before we go?
Uh Yeah, I mean, other horror movies out now. I know that so Titan, Kaylee's holding up the hardcover, which she mentioned does have the extras, and they're signed. And actually, they just sent me another like 2,000 signature sheet, so I think they're planning on reprinting more. So,
Oh
uh,
yeah, mine is signed.
yeah, so there'll be more of those in the UK. Otherwise, yeah, it's obnoxious to be talking about next year, but next year I have a middle grade horror novel coming out called Another. Um,
Ooh.
yeah. I'm really excited. So I don't think it's sold in the UK yet, so I don't know. Hopefully it will sooner rather than later. And I don't know like when, it's just summer of 2025. Um, yeah, otherwise that's
Is
all I
that through,
got.
is that through Titan?
Well, Another will be through my US publisher.
Mhm.
Uh, Titan typically doesn't do YA or middle grade, I don't think. So I don't
Yeah, I didn't think.
I really don't know what the what's going on with
Okay.
foreign sales for the young adult novel just yet.
Well, I'll find out, don't you worry.
Yeah.
So I can review it on my site.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you once again so much for doing this, Paul, because you're one of my favorite authors
Well,
since
that's very
since A
kind.
Head Full
Thank
of
you.
Ghosts, and I've been, trying to remain calm, but I've been really excited to get to speak with you, and I really appreciate you answering all my questions, and I'm sure that everyone listening or watching has really enjoyed it as well. So for now, for everybody else, we're just going to say the general goatee sign off, Paul, is bleat.
Bleat.